Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 810, and of course, we have a ton of news to get through on today's show. Before I get into it, I do want to remind people to subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone show with the news breaking over the weekend, Israel attacking Iran. Me and then Connor Freeman and then myself just did two breaking news live streams on the Kyle Anzalone channel covering everything that was going on in Iran and Israel, breaking that all down. And so, if you would like, if you want to know if I ever go live, it'll probably be on that Kyle Anzalone channel in like a breaking news scenario. You definitely want to be subscribed to that channel so you don't miss that content. It is the first link in the show notes page, very easy to find. So subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone show. Help me get over 1,000 subscribers. I am just on the brink of that now. I think like 30 or so to go. So help me out and subscribe to that channel, and that way you could get all the breaking news. All right, let's get into what we have to talk about today. Now, I want to talk about this story I wrote for the Institute on June 11th first. 64% of Israelis say no innocent people in Gaza. So Tel Aviv's mass killing campaign in Gaza has the support of nearly 2/3 of Israelis who believe there are no innocent people in the Strip. The Israeli ministry has killed or injured more than 50,000 Palestinian children during the onslaught. According to Haaretz, a recent poll conducted by Cord Center at Hebrew University in Jerusalem found that 64% of Israeli adults agree with the statement, "There are no innocent people in Gaza." The survey found a wide gap in opinion between Arab citizens of the Jewish state and those who backed the governing coalition. 9 in 10 supporters of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government agreed with the no innocent statement, while 92% of Israeli Arabs disagreed. And so think about that really quick, that you have 64% of Israelis agreeing to this statement, but that includes probably 20% of the Israeli population who are Israeli Arabs or Palestinians, and 92%, so 9 in 10 of them voted against that. So obviously, if you're just looking at the number of Jewish Israelis, you're probably looking at close to 3 and 4 agree with the statement that there are no innocent people in Gaza. Of the Israelis who do not support Netanyahu, 7 in 10 who favor the right-wing opposition agreed with the statement, while 2/3 of voters who want a more centrist government said they agreed. And so this is the majority opinion across the political spectrum in Israel. Only 30% of those who support the left-wing opposition said the same. And so the most marginal of Israeli political parties, that's the Palestinian, the Arab coalition, and then the even smaller like Labor coalition, is very minor in the amount of people who oppose the statement and who believe there are innocent people in Gaza, which of course, 2 point something million people in Gaza, half of them children. Obviously, most people, the overwhelming number of people in Gaza, have no ties to Hamas whatsoever and are completely innocent. So, Tel Aviv has often asserted that its military operations in Gaza target Hamas militants and take reasonable precautions to avoid civilian harm. However, tens of thousands of children have been killed and injured in the attacks. Last month, the United Nations Agency for Children, UNICEF, reported that the number of child casualties in Gaza had crossed 50,000. And when Israel says, we don't try to kill children, they do. They intentionally do. They had a program called Where's Daddy? Early on in this war, where rather than trying to take out Hamas fighters or suspected Hamas fighters on the battlefield, they waited until those people returned home and then killed them and their entire families. And so that dozens of children at a time, just tons of innocent people. And they named the program Where's Daddy? Because, if you remember being a little kid and daddy was off at work, you're home with mama, and you're going, where's daddy? Where's daddy? When's daddy coming home? Right? They're supposed to be excited to see their daddy, and today daddy's coming home with a 500,000, 2,000 pound Israeli bomb that's going to blow you and your entire family into smithereens, completely annihilated entire families, children, scores of children at a time, blown up and killed by this policy. And yet the Israelis are saying that there are no innocent people in Gaza. All these people are just as guilty as any Hamas fighter who crossed out of Gaza on October 7th. So the survey results are unsurprising, as 80% of Jewish Israelis said earlier this year that they support Donald Trump's proposal to clean out Gaza. The original Trump plan, before it was partially walked back by officials, explicitly endorsed ethnic cleansing as a call for the permanent expulsion of Palestinians who would be deprived of the right to return to their homeland. Additionally, the Acord Center poll found that 64% of Israelis believe there is no need for local media to report the war with more nuance or present a broader picture regarding the situation of Palestinian civilians. Respondents were also highly critical of Western media for alleged pro-Palestinian bias, including BBC, CNN, and even Fox News. And so these people are so indoctrinated into believing that every single Palestinian, man, woman, child, infant, newborn baby, are all equally guilty and equally terrorists and all deserve to die. And so when Fox News presents this with any kind of nuance, simply noting that there are innocent children being killed in this or something like that, the Israelis can't handle that because they don't believe that's the case and they want genocide. All right. So next up here, we have one from our friend Will Porter. He wrote this one for antiwar.com on June 14th. IDF expands Gaza evacuation zones to 70% of the Strip. The Israeli Defense Forces have called on thousands of Palestinians to leave Khan Yunis and nearby towns in Gaza, extending Israel's combat zone to cover the majority of the Strip. Designated humanitarian zones have repeatedly come under Israeli fire throughout the conflict. In a statement published on Friday, the IDF's English language spokesman warned that Gazans in dangerous combat zones could face extreme force, urging them to flee towards the Mediterranean coast. The spokesman also shared a map showing the no-go areas covered in red, and if you look at it, it's, all of northern Gaza, all of southern Gaza, and then in central Gaza, it's all of what that would be the east that are no-go zones. I think there's some areas around maybe Gaza City, Deir al-Bala, al-Mawasi that are still the humanitarian zones that you could go to, but this was already a small, densely populated, overcrowded area, and now even more so. The area was expanded yet again just one day later, enlarged to cover additional towns in the Khan Yunis government, including Bnei Shalua and a few others. The Israeli spokesman added that Palestinians should remain in the Mawasi area near Rafah until further notice, which was designated a combat zone, now covering 70% of Gaza, according to the Cradle. The IDF warning came after a massive communications blackout across Gaza, leaving most of the territory without internet service. And so you wonder how many Palestinians are even able to get this message and understand where they're supposed to go and how they're supposed to get there. A spokesman for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the outage marked a complete collapse of services caused by heavy military activity in central and southern Gaza. The spokesman said, this is not a routine outage, but a total failure of Gaza's digital infrastructure, and it is affecting lifelines to emergency services, humanitarian coordination, and critical information to civilians. Internet access was fully restored on Saturday, according to the Palestinian Telecommunications Regulation Authority. While the IDF has issued countless evacuation orders of residents of Gaza throughout the Israeli bombing campaign, areas designated as humanitarian zones have repeatedly come under fire. Multiple Israeli strikes on a makeshift tent camp in Mawasi last year reportedly killed more than 100 people and left hundreds more injured. Aid distribution sites have also been bombed in recent days, with 15 Palestinians killed in separate IDF strikes near Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF hubs in north-central Gaza. The GHF, an American org with close links to the U.S. and Israeli governments, has faced criticism from rights groups who say the foundation is not a genuine humanitarian effort and involved in the deliberate restriction of aid by the Israeli government. According to Gaza health officials, more than 55,000 Palestinians have been killed in the Israeli onslaught after Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel. The war in Gaza has dragged on even as Tel Aviv escalated its conflict with Iran in recent days. And of course, that's where we're going next. This is a lot of my coverage over the weekend at antiwar.com of what Israel's offensive, undeclared, unilateral war that they're waging against Iran. So Iran strikes Israel, ends nuclear talks with the U.S. On Friday, Iran began its response to the Israeli war launched on the Islamic Republic last night. Additionally, Tehran said it will withdraw from talks with Washington on establishing a new nuclear safeguards agreement. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei announced that Tehran would retaliate to Israel's aggressive war in a statement on Friday afternoon. The Zionist regime has made a big mistake, a grave error, and committed a reckless act. By God's grace, the consequences of this will bring that regime to ruin. The Iranian nation won't permit the blood of its valued martyrs to go unrevenged, nor will it ignore the violation of its airspace. Iranian missiles were reported to have hit targets inside Israel, with some video showing impacts in Tel Aviv. At the time of this writing, the extent of the Iranian attack and the damage in Israel is unclear. Now, there has been more clarity in several more rounds of Iranian strikes in Israel, Israeli strikes on Iran. Since I wrote this article, there is extensive damage in Israel. Trying to really get a full picture and comprehend that is somewhat difficult. Israel is working really hard to prevent journalists and Israeli citizens even from sharing the pictures and images of the Iranian damage. I'm sure this is a propaganda measure meant to placate the people of Israel, to make them feel like their government didn't launch an aggressive war that is now getting some of them killed. Certainly dozens of Israeli deaths at this point. The exact number I don't have, and I'm not sure it's even been made public. So, according to Reuters, Pentagon correspondent Idris Ali, 2 U.S. officials confirmed that American forces helped shoot down Iranian missiles that were targeting Israel. The U.S. also deployed additional military assets to the region to help intercept Iranian missiles and drones. Moreover, Tehran canceled talks with Washington that were scheduled to take place on Sunday in Oman. Earlier in the day, Trump urged Iran to agree to a deal with the U.S., and American officials said the White House was still open to meeting with Iranians. However, that's obviously not going to happen because Israel is bombing Iran, and it really appears that the talks were meant to scuttle the diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran. So next up here, let's get into the U.S. role in this a little bit. Official U.S.-Israeli deception gave Iran false security ahead of attack. A senior Israeli official told the Jerusalem Post that Tel Aviv and Washington worked together to convince Tehran that diplomacy was still possible after Israel was ready to attack Iran. Just hours before the Israeli massive assault began, President Donald Trump maintained he was still committed to talks. The Israeli outlet reports the round of U.S.-Iranian nuclear negotiations scheduled for Sunday was part of a coordinated U.S.-Israeli deception aimed at lowering Iran's guard ahead of Friday's attack. In a post on Truth Social, shortly before the Israeli strikes began, Trump declared that we remain committed to a diplomatic resolution of the Iran nuclear issue. My entire administration has been directed to negotiate with Iran. They could be a great country, but they first must completely give up hopes of attaining a nuclear weapon. Thank you for your attention to this matter. After the Israeli attack was in progress, Secretary of State Marco Rubio denied the U.S. was involved. However, American officials have said the White House was aware the strikes were set to begin, with Trump telling Fox News he was briefed on the operation. Barak Ravid of Axios, moreover, later reported that Tel Aviv was given a clear green light to start bombing, citing two unnamed Israeli officials. Sources speaking with Axios said the perceived split between Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was also coordinated behind the scenes, and this is what the report explained. Two Israeli officials claimed to Axios that Trump and his aides were only pretending to oppose an Israeli attack in public and didn't express opposition in private. The goal, they said, was to convince Iran that no attack was imminent and to make sure Iranians on Israel's target list wouldn't move to new locations. The source said that Trump and Netanyahu discussed the attack during a phone call on Monday. After the call, reports said that Trump pressed Netanyahu not to attack Iran, but that was another effort to deceive the Islamic Republic. In a second post following the attack, Trump said he gave Iran the opportunity to make a deal and suggested Israel used American weapons in the massive air raid. I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest of words, just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they just couldn't get it done. And it's important to remember that the nuclear negotiations were only going on between the U.S. and Iran for a couple of months. And the U.S. was frequently changing its public position during that time. So the idea that there was ample time to get a deal done and that Iran was just intransigent on the issue and that's why a deal hasn't gotten done is simply untrue. Trump's post continued, I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipated, or were told, that the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far, and that Israel has a lot of it with much more to come, and they know how to use it. The U.S. and Iran began negotiations on establishing a new nuclear agreement in April, with the two sides engaging in 5 rounds of Omani-mediated talks. At times, a deal appeared possible, with Iranian officials saying dialogue was leading to progress. A 6th round of talks was scheduled for Sunday, but now appears unlikely. A second source, speaking with the Jerusalem Post, said the goal of Israeli military operations was not the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear facility, but rather to hit missile sites and top Iranian leaders to bring down the government. And one more thing I would mention here, one of the targets of Israel's assassination campaign was the lead nuclear negotiator for Iran. So the man that the U.S. was actually engaging in talks with to try to reach a deal. And there are reports from Iran that basically killing them killed any round of talks, right? That was just a clear sign. So next up on the U.S. support for Israel, U.S. sent Israel hundreds of missiles days before attack on Iran. So just days before the surprise and unprovoked Israeli war on Iran, the U.S. shipped Tel Aviv 300 Hellfire missiles. An Israeli official implied they were used in the assault. On Friday, Israel launched an offensive war against Iran, striking military sites and nuclear facilities and carrying out targeted assassinations of top officials. Middle East Eye reported that on Tuesday, just 3 days before the attack began, the U.S. sent 300 Hellfire missiles to Israel. One Israeli official indicated that the precision air-to-ground munitions were used in targeted attacks on top civilian and military leaders. Ali Shamkhani, a senior aide to the Ayatollah, was killed in his home on Friday. He was part of the negotiating team engaging with the U.S. to work out a new nuclear agreement. American and Iranian officials have engaged in 5 rounds of talks, and a 6th was scheduled for Sunday. Tehran indicated it did believe a deal was possible. However, following the start of Israel's undeclared war, Iran called off the talks with the U.S. A New York Times correspondent said Iranian officials made it clear that Tehran views the assassination as Israel targeting and killing nuclear diplomacy with the U.S. Israeli officials say President Donald Trump played a key role in deceiving the Islamic Republic into believing Tel Aviv was not planning to attack and the window for diplomacy was still open. Additionally, Tel Aviv said Washington provided intelligence that Israeli forces used during the attack. Since taking office, Trump has supplied Israel with billions of dollars in arms. In April, the U.S. sent Israel 9 plane loads of bunker-busting bombs. At the time, Israel's Khan news agency explained the massive weapons shipment came in anticipation of a possible joint U.S.-Israeli strike should nuclear negotiations between Washington and Tehran fail. And even though those nuclear negotiations had not failed, there still was a very viable chance of making a deal. Israel likely used those weapons in an attack against Iran, killing any chance of a deal. Now, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this next article, but it is one I wrote for the Institute on June 13th. Large numbers in Congress back attack on Iran, call for U.S. to support Israel. And so we have Lindsey Graham here saying, game on, pray for Israel. And the game on and treating this like it's just some kind of board game or football game is how a lot of members of Congress seem to be responding. Also, saying pray for Israel at a time when Israel was bombing another country, killing civilians in another country, and had not been bombed themselves is just despicable and a sick and twisted way that our elected leaders often twist their interpretation of Christianity to basically mean, for the U.S. or more often Israel to smite their enemies. So some lawmakers hope the war would bring down the Iranian government. This is Carlos A. Gimenez, Republican from Florida, saying the threat from Iran will only stop once the regime is destroyed. Anything less is just a temporary respite from the existential threat Iran poses to our allies in the free world. And of course, we get a lot of these members of Congress saying, Iran has a nuclear bomb, Iran has a nuclear bomb, Iran wants to wipe out Israel, Iran wages aggressive wars, Iran, when in reality, it's Israel that has an undeclared nuclear program. It's Israel that attacks its neighbors and provokes fights and seizes territory. It's not Iran. Do want to mention here, though, before we move on, John Fetterman, one of the Democrats, also just so salivating 24/7. I mean, he is not a very smart man, but he is very happy this is going on. There have been some members of Congress who have come out against this. Chris Murphy, Jack Reed, Hank Johnson, Rashida Tlaib all stand out to me as people on the Democrat side of the aisle. Less so on the Republican side, but Senator Rand Paul, Congressman Thomas Massie, and recently Marjorie Taylor Greene have all also come out against this. So it's good to see that there's some opposition on both sides of the aisle. I do think it was notable, and I want to put this tweet up on screen here, that Thomas Massie called this an offensive war and a war of aggression. Very important to condemn the war in this way, and I'm really glad that he said that. So this one from Connor Freeman, June 14th, antiwar.com. Netanyahu says Israeli jets will hit every target, every site in Iran. So, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Tel Aviv will bomb every target of the Ayatollah's regime, the Jerusalem Post reported. The Israeli leader vowed Israeli Air Force jets will be seen over the skies of the Iranian capital. And according to Al Jazeera, Iranian state TV reports heavy and destructive retaliatory attacks on Israel will occur within hours. So in the same statement, Netanyahu boasted that since the launch of his aggressive war and surprise attack against the Islamic Republic, his forces have caused real damage to the nuclear energy program. And this is something that should bring a lot of concern to people around the world, that there's attacks on the nuclear energy program. This could cause some major environmental catastrophes, but everybody's just saying how much they love Israel in the West right now. I should clarify, not the people. I see a lot of people against this war, but particularly the elected leaders in the West. Now, moving on to this one. This is a very troubling article from Dave DeCamp here. June 15th, yesterday, antiwar.com. Sources, U.S. will enter Israel's war with Iran. Sources familiar with the matter have told antiwar.com's editorial director Scott Horton that the Trump administration is poised to enter Israel's aggressive war against Iran. U.S. airstrikes on Iran could begin as soon as Monday. Please contact the White House by sending an email or calling the comment line starting at 10 a.m. Eastern on Monday. And so that's probably as soon as this episode is up, you could start making those calls sending those emails. Tell them that you do not want the U.S. to enter this disastrous war, which could lead to heavy American casualties at bases across the Middle East. The U.S. has supported the war by reportedly providing Israel with intelligence, helping to intercept ballistic missiles and drones, and sending Israel weapons, but so far there has been no direct U.S. attacks on Iran. Iranian officials have warned that Tehran would hit U.S. bases in the region in response to any U.S. strikes. Axios reported on Saturday that Israel is urging the U.S. to join the war since Israel lacks the bunker-busting bombs necessary to do serious damage to Iran's Fordow plant, which is buried deep underground. An Israeli official told Axios that President Trump has previously suggested that the U.S. could strike Fordow. Trump himself said on Sunday it was possible that the U.S. would get directly involved in the war, which Israel launched early Friday morning with strikes across Iran. Netanyahu started the war under the pretext of preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon, but it was consensus of the U.S. intelligence community that there was no evidence Iran was working to build a nuclear weapon, and Tehran made very clear they were ready to make a deal with the U.S. that would significantly lower uranium enrichment levels and increase the oversight of its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. And it doesn't look good here. Last up on the Iran issue, Netanyahu says Israel's bombing campaign of Iran could result in regime change. This seems to be the true goal of Israel here, is to overthrow the Iranian government. And so, first of all, this means that the U.S. is locked in another regime change war in the Middle East. The thing that Trump said he wouldn't do, wouldn't get us involved in, he has now gotten us involved in by backing Israel here. This is going to be a catastrophe. This is going to be extremely concerning. Iran was not trying to build a nuclear bomb, is not going to build a nuclear bomb, or would not have built a nuclear bomb had Israel not attacked. Now, I'm less certain of that. Maybe Iran does try to build a nuclear bomb, but this is highly, highly troubling. Wrapping up here with this one on Yemen. And that is that Israel tried to assassinate the Houthi military chief of staff in Yemen. Doesn't appear that this strike was successful, but when you look at the Middle East, if you look at who's aggressor, if you look at who is attacking all their neighbors, it's Israel, it's Israel, it's Israel. The propaganda says Israel has to defend itself. Iran's an offensive threat. Syria was an offensive threat. Hezbollah in Lebanon was an offensive threat. Hamas was an offensive threat. The Houthis in Yemen were an offensive threat. Really, it's just Israel that's causing all this havoc across the Middle East. And if the U.S. cut our ties, it would make the U.S. standing in the world a hell of a lot better. All right, that's where I'm wrapping up this show for today. I will be back this afternoon, 4:45 Eastern Time, live with another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show. You won't want to miss it, and we'll, I'm sure, have just a ton of content, a ton of articles out this week. So be sure you follow me on X at Kyle Anzalone _ so you don't miss any of that. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back with another episode soon.